Hello, everybody. How are we doing this Wednesday? It's Wednesday. Wednesday story time. Everybody, welcome in. Welcome in. How's your day been? How's your evening going? Uh-oh. 1 second. Testing. Rah. 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 Okay. Let's try that again. From the top. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. How are we doing this evening, this Wednesday night? I was unmuted during that. Okay, well. Fuck it, we ball. Hello. Oh boy. Today has been a day, but we are here. We are live, and it is so good to see you all. Okay, so it's been a couple of weeks. There's been quite a dense story, so before we get started with tonight's reading session, a reminder that our story is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And I am going to start off this stream with a summary, because Lord knows we probably need it by now. With such a large cast and such a great amount of detail and a variety of things that have happened, it's easy to forget the details. In fact, I've already forgotten who some of this cast is. So, I have a little bit of a cheat sheet that I'm going to read from that will be a little bit of a summary of each chapter by chapter uh, synopsis and breakdown. That way, everybody is caught up and brought up to speed before we get into tonight's affair, because I have a feeling things are going to happen. Capital T. So, with that in mind, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, the plot summary. So we're gonna start. We're gonna go chapter by chapter, and we're just gonna. I'm just gonna quickly read quick little bit about each chapter, so that way we can get familiar once again. But first, the cast, so we can remember all the players on the board. First off, we have the judge, Mr. Justice Wargrave, the ex-governess, Vera Claythorne, Captain Philip Lombard, the old lady, Emily Brant, General MacArthur, Dr. Armstrong, the young strapping lad, Anthony Marston, a private detective sort of character, Mr. Bloor, Fred Narracott, who is, I believe, only been mentioned, Mr. and Mrs. Rogers, the servants of the house, and two characters that have not been introduced yet into the story, Sir Thomas Legge and Inspector Maine. Chapter 1's quick summary is that Vera Claythorne has been hired as a secretary to a UN Owen. Dr. Armstrong has been asked to take care of Mrs. Owen. Ex-Inspector Bloor has been hired to make sure that nobody steals Mrs. Owen's jewels. Philip Lombard has been hired to do whatever Mr. Owen asks him to do, despite legalities. General MacArthur thinks that he is meeting up with his old friends. Anthony Marston thinks that he is visiting a fellow rich man and races in a sports car to make a very flashy first impression. Justice Wargrave's letter comes from an old acquaintance of his, a Lady Constance Comington. Wargrave is the only person who was not given a letter from anyone named Owen. So, that was Chapter 1's breakdown, where a lot of the pieces are placed on the board. Chapter 2. All the guests meet at Oak Bridge and take taxis to a boat. They introduce themselves to each other, and the conversations are awkward and stilted. It seems odd that none of these people know each other, and the General MacArthur thinks that there's something off with Philip Lombard. Lombard thinks it's strange that Vera Claythorne has been hired to be a secretary, but Vera says she is a substitute for a secretary who has fallen ill. No one appears to have actually met the hosts, either UN Owen or his wife. Ex-Inspector Bloor tells everyone that his name is Mr. Davis. Lombard evades the question that Vera asks about their hosts by pretending that there is a wasp on her arm. The boat driver, Fred Narracott, remarks to himself that the crowd in the boat is not like the guests that he took to the island, Soldier Island as we are going to call it. Nothing like the guests that he took previously when the millionaire owned it. He thinks that Anthony Marston, who screeches up to the launch in an expensive sports car, is the right kind of person born to money. Everyone else looks at Mr. Marston as though he were a young Norse god, a handsome boy, strapping muscles, full of vitality. The narrator says everyone will remember this moment later. Fred Narracott tells his passengers that the island cannot be reached during a storm, and that they're all a little nervous about so many people in such a small boat. When they reach the island, they meet Rogers, the butler, and his wife, Ethel Rogers, the cook, and lead them to their rooms. Vera Claythorne talks with Mrs. Rogers, noticing that she is a woman who looks like she is always afraid of something, and Vera wonders why she and her husband have not yet met their own employer. Vera is amused to notice a copy of an old nursery rhyme on the wall of her room. She begins to think about how one could drown at sea and tries to get the thought out of her head. More on that later. Dr. Armstrong arrives on the island late and realizes that he knows Justice Wargrave from having testified in front of him in court before. General MacArthur continues to think that there is something wrong with Philip Lombard, while the old lady, Emily Brent, reads a passage in the Bible about God's judgment and gets ready for dinner. Chapter 3's summary. After dinner, all the guests notice that there are 10 porcelain figurines on the table, matching the 10 people in the nursery rhyme that all the guests appear to have discovered in their rooms. Vera Claythorne thinks it's amusing, but Justice Wargrave mutters it is childish. Vera and Emily Brent leave the dining room to go into the drawing room, which is sort of a sitting room, and Vera is still put off by the sound of the ocean waves. More on that later. In conversation, Vera corrects Emily's mistake about the host's last name, and Miss Brent says that she has never met anyone named Owen in her life. Before the two women can explore the ramifications of this realization, some of the men enter the room, and everyone has coffee. Suddenly, there's a voice that booms out of the walls, accusing each of the guests in turn, as well as Rogers and his wife, of specific murders for which justice was never served, naming each guest with their full government name, as well as the full names of their victims, with one exception: the 21 men of East African tribes left to die by Philip Lombard. Rogers is so shocked that he drops the coffee tray, and his wife screams and faints. Philip Lombard and Anthony Marston rush to bring her to a couch. Dr. Armstrong treats her and gives her brandy. They discover that the voice is playing from a gramophone in the next room, which plays through holes drilled into the wall. They put Ethel Rogers to bed, and Dr. Armstrong gives her a sedative. Everyone meets again in the drawing room to talk about what just happened. The men all decide to have a drink to settle their nerves, and Justice Wargrave questions Mr. Rogers, who says that he and his wife were hired by a letter from an agency and have never met Mr. or Mrs. Owen. Rogers insisted that he played the record on written order of Mr. Owen, his boss, and shows Justice Wargrave said letter. Wargrave asks everyone in the room to talk about their invitation to Soldier Island. In the process, they discover that ex-Inspector Bloor is there under an assumed name and is not actually from South Africa. Bloor admits that he was hired, quote, to protect Mrs. Owen's jewels, but now he thinks there is no such person, and no such jewels. Justice Wargrave notices the initials for each letter's writer are UN, together with Owen, could be construed as unknown. He concludes they have all been invited to the island by a homicidal lunatic. Chapter 4's summary. Justice Wargrave adds his own letter from Lady Constance Colmington to the pile of evidence regarding reasons for being on the island, noting that the letter is written in a way that matches the Lady Colmington's style. Wargrave concludes that the person who set this trap knows about everyone's lives, friends, actions, mistakes. Everyone in the group tries to defend themselves, but Wargrave has the first opportunity to insist on his own innocence. He claims that Edward Seton, a prisoner he had once sentenced to death, was guilty, even though the defense attorney thought that the jury would deem him innocent, and he feels no guilt about acting according to the law and convicting Seton, sending him to his death. Dr. Armstrong remembers this case and privately thinks the judge is lying about not knowing Seton personally. The others then tell their stories one by one. Vera Claythorne, through tears, tells the story of her time as a governess, or nanny, basically, to a Cyril Hamilton, who she says swam out too far into the ocean and drowned before she could get him. She claims that she tried to save him but couldn't reach him in time. The inquest exonerated her, and even the child's mother never held a grudge against her. General MacArthur claims that Arthur Richmond wasn't his wife's lover, and the dangerous assignment that MacArthur sent him on followed normal wartime protocol. Philip Lombard cheerily admits to leaving 21 African natives to die, horrifying both the General MacArthur and Vera Claythorne. Lombard justifies this by saying natives, quote, don't mind dying. Anthony Marston suddenly remembers he hit 2 children while driving on a road in Cambridge and calls it a beastly nuisance that the children rushed out onto the road in front of him. He said, "Speeds come to stay," and feels no remorse for his actions. Just an accident, he claimed. Rogers explains that he and his wife took care of an elderly woman named Jennifer Brady, who was always ill. On the night that she died, the telephone was out of service due to a storm, and Rogers went to get the doctor on foot. Miss Brady died before the doctor could reach her. Rogers claims that no one ever complained about their work at Miss Brady's house. Ex-Inspector Bloor cuts in, asking, as an ex-detective would, "Came into a little something. At her death, though. Eh?" Rogers insists that their inheritance was just the reward of a job well done. Lombard questions ex-Inspector Bloor about getting a promotion for providing evidence to convict Landor, and Bloor insists he was just doing his job. Dr. Armstrong claims not to remember the patient he supposedly killed, saying patients come to him too late to be saved at the time. But internally, he remembers to himself exactly the case in which he was drunk, and most definitely killed his patient through negligence and malpractice. It shocked him enough to stop drinking altogether, and none of the sisters in the hospital ever said a word about his culpability. Emily Brent is the only one who refuses to defend herself. She says she has a clear conscience and nothing with which to reproach herself. Rogers says there is no one else on the island, and there is no boat, so they have to wait for Fred Narracott to come the next morning to get them off the island. Anthony Marston thinks they should just stay and solve the mystery and says, "I'm all for crime. Here's to it," and downs the drink, dying a moment later. And that's where things start to ramp up. That was the end of Chapter 4 and our very first session of reading this story. Chapter 5. With the situation on Soldier Island becoming more dangerous, and Anthony Marston dead, the guests think the death is a suicide at first, but they all remember seeing Marston roar up to the dock in a sports car, looking like a, quote, Norse god, and it doesn't seem likely that such a person would kill himself. Dr. Armstrong tests the glass that Marston drank out of, as well as the whiskey and the soda bottles, and says that the glass that he drank out of contains cyanide, not the bottles. No one saw anyone put anything into Marston's drink. Everyone goes to bed, and Mr. Rogers cleans up the dining room, noticing one of the figurines on the table is missing. And then there were 9. Justice Wargrave thinks about the Seton case and feels satisfied that he was the deciding factor in condemning Seton to death. Meanwhile, General MacArthur can't sleep because he envisions Leslie, his wife, with Arthur Richmond, the man that she committed an affair with. He remembers the cold, murderous rage that surfaced when he realized that the affair had been going on for a while, and was only informed when his wife put the wrong letter in the wrong envelope. He knows that he murdered Richmond intentionally by sending him on a mission he knew would kill him. He never told Leslie he found out about the affair, but she became an empty husk after Richmond died, and died shortly later herself of double pneumonia. He fears that Armitage, a young soldier under his command, figured out his intentions and talked about it amongst his peers. General MacArthur avoided his military friends who started to look at him differently. He decides this is a good time and place in his life to end it all. He decides he will not leave Soldier Island alive. Vera Claythorne can't sleep either. She thinks of Hugo Hamilton, her former lover, telling her that if Cyril Hamilton were a girl, he would have inherited enough money to marry Vera. Vera thinks about how the scrawny little Cyril begged and whined to swim out to a rock at sea. She didn't think he would drown. She also notices that Marston's death is just what happened in the first verse of the nursery rhyme on her wall. Chapter 6's summary. Dr. Armstrong has a dream that he has to murder a patient on the table without arousing the suspicion of a sister or a British nurse attending the surgery. He first thinks he has to murder Miss Brent, who is malicious, but the patient slowly becomes Anthony Marston, dead yet laughing. The shaking turns out to be from Mr. Rogers trying to wake Dr. Armstrong to tell the doctor that he can't wake his wife, and that something is wrong with her. Dr. Armstrong examines Mrs. Rogers and tells Mr. Rogers his wife is dead. Rogers says his wife never used sleeping pills and only took what Dr. Armstrong gave her last night. The boat hasn't shown up and there is a storm coming. Dr. Armstrong waits until after breakfast to tell the other guests that Ethel Rogers has died. Everyone makes small talk until then, purposely avoiding talk about the island. When Dr. Armstrong delivers the bad news, Miss Brent, who decides that Mrs. Rogers died of fright because of her guilt of murdering the old lady, claims that her death was an act of God and that the wrath of God can strike down sinners. Justice Wargrave tells her Providence leaves that sort of thing to mortals. Ex-Inspector Blore thinks that Mr. Rogers killed her because she was becoming weak and might crack, telling the rest of the guests that they did kill the old woman that was under their care. General MacArthur doesn't think a man would do that to his wife, but Ex-Inspector Blore says, when a man's next in danger, he doesn't stop to think too much about sentiment. Philip Lombard tells Blore he thinks that the boat isn't coming because it's part of the plan. General MacArthur wanders past and says they will never leave the island. He mutters that there is peace in that knowledge. To come to the end, not have to go on. And wanders into the yard and off to the seaside. Lombard and Blore believe that General MacArthur has lost his mind. Dr. Armstrong comes out onto the terrace and is about to speak with Justice Wargrave, but Mr. Rogers begs him inside the house. Rogers is completely terrorized and points out to Dr. Armstrong that another figurine went missing. And then there were 8. I'm telling you, a lot has happened. Chapter 7's summary. Vera Claythorne asks Emily Brent if she really believes that Mr. and Mrs. Rogers killed Jennifer Brady, and Miss Brent says she does. Vera panics and wonders about her opinion of the other cases. Miss Brent says some of them are far-fetched, although Philip Lombard does admit he left people to die. Vera repeats the "only natives" line, but Miss Brent says that they are our brothers, whether black or white. Vera begins to lose hold of her emotions, disagreeing with Miss Brent in her head. Miss Brent tells Vera about Beatrice, her maid, who became pregnant. She didn't want to tell the story in front of the men, but reveals to Vera why the girl died. Miss Brent fired Beatrice, and Beatrice later took her own life, throwing herself into the river. Miss Brent's lack of guilt and her conviction that her actions were justified terrifies Vera. Vera asks, "Weren't you sorry?" Miss Brent puts up her armor of virtue and isn't sorry at all. Dr. Armstrong speaks privately with Philip Lombard and tells him that Rogers and his wife could have killed their employer very simply by withholding medication. Lombard wonders if Mrs. Rogers took her own life, but Dr. Armstrong thinks that 2 suicides in a row is not very realistic. He also thinks Anthony Marston did not take his own life because nobody carries cyanide around with them. Dr. Armstrong theorizes they might be in the clutches of a homicidal maniac because the cause of the deaths of Marston and Mrs. Rogers match the first 2 verses of the nursery rhyme. Dr. Armstrong says that Rogers can't be lying about there being no one else on the island because he is scared nearly out of his senses. The doctor and Lombard decide to rope Blore in to help them search the island for a possible killer. They leave the women out of it and don't tell General MacArthur or Justice Wargrave. Beatrice threw herself into the river. Why is it always like that? I feel like in older times, it kind of is the most accessible way to go. I mean, throwing yourself into a fast-moving enough, deep enough body of water will pretty much do the job for you. There's little fright in it as opposed to some of the more conventional methods. And relatively, it's peaceful. I don't want to speculate too much on that. Not on stream anyway, but my guess is just it's easily accessible, nature provided, and there's a relative lack of fear in it compared to other methods. But again, I don't want to go too deep into that. That's a topic. So let's not. Chapter 8's summary, and then we're caught up. Ex-Inspector Blore, Captain Philip Lombard, and Dr. Armstrong. Why does this sound like a Star Trek party, like a knockoff Star Trek party? Anyway, the 3 of them set out to search the island for a possible murderer. Lombard reveals he has a revolver, which Blore at first thinks is useful, but then wonders to Dr. Armstrong why Lombard would have brought a revolver to the island for a vacation. During their search, they come across General MacArthur, who is sitting in a trance at Seaside. He snaps at them and says there is so little time, and that they need to leave him alone. They all think the general has completely lost it, and Armstrong begins to wonder if the general could be the killer. The men continue their search, find nothing, and realize they can't adequately search the cliffs of the island without a rope. Blore retrieves some rope, and Lombard volunteers to drop down the side of the cliff to explore. Vera Claythorne tries to avoid Emily Brent now that she knows what Miss Brent is like, but can't stop thinking about the young maid Beatrice drowning herself. She also envisions the young Seton being sent to death by Justice Wargrave. When Vera goes outside to get some air, she sees General MacArthur and speaks with him. The general tells her he actually did send Richmond to his death because of the affair with his wife, and that the general loved Leslie very much. After Richmond's death, Leslie left him alone, and he was even more alone after her passing. He tells Vera, "You'll be glad too, when the end comes." Vera doesn't understand him. The men have found nothing on the island, so they search the house. Rogers passes by with drinks. They hear a sound upstairs and think it's the murderer, but it's just Rogers getting his clothes out of his room, because he doesn't want to sleep in the room with his wife's dead body. Rogers moves so quickly and quietly, it's no wonder they thought a stranger was in the room. Rogers speaks only to Dr. Armstrong. The men continue their search and find nothing, agreeing that there is no one else on the island, but their 8 selves. And that was the catch-up portion of this stream. So, with that in mind, we have 2 deaths in the books, lots of mounting suspicion, lots of motives, and lots of backstories for each of the characters, some of which are confirmed to be guilty of the things they were being accused of or condemned of. And now that I think about it, I really think that Saul was inspired by something like this. I mean, with the whole, like, digging into their history, essentially kidnapping them, not with a pig man, but with false pretenses, trapping them on a remote location. But, unlike Saul, there is no win. Jigsaw at least had a win condition. These people are just gonna die. Now that that's out of the way, let us start with Chapter 9. Once again, I do not remember every voice I provided the characters, so they may sound different. However, F it, we ball. Okay. Chapter 9. Lombard said slowly, "So we've been wrong. Wrong all along. Built up a nightmare of superstition and fantasy, all because of the coincidence of 2 deaths." Armstrong said gravely, "And yet, you know, the argument holds. Hang it all, I'm a doctor. I know something about suicides. Anthony Marston wasn't a suicidal type." Lombard said doubtfully, "It couldn't, I suppose, have been an accident?" Blore snorted, unconvinced. "Damned queer sort of accident," he grunted. There was a pause, then Blore said, "About the woman," and stopped. "Mrs. Rogers?" "Yes, it's possible, isn't it, that might have been an accident." Philip Lombard said, "An accident? In what way?" Blore looked slightly embarrassed. His red brick face grew a little deeper in hue. He said, almost blurting out the words, "Look here, Doctor. You did give us some dope, you know." Armstrong stared at him. "Dope? What do you mean?" "Well, last night, you said yourself you gave us something to make us sleep." "Oh, that, yes. A harmless sedative." "What was it exactly?" "I gave her a mild dose of Trianol, a perfectly harmless preparation." Blore grew redder still. He said, "Oh, look here. Not to mince matters. You didn't give her an overdose, did you?" Dr. Armstrong said angrily, "I don't know what you mean." Blore said, "Well, it's possible, isn't it? You may have made a mistake. Well, these things do happen once in a while." Armstrong said sharply, "I did nothing of the sort. The suggestion is ridiculous." He stopped and added in a cold, biting tone, "Or do you suggest that I gave her an overdose on purpose?" Philip Lombard said quickly, "Look here, you two. Gotta keep our heads. Don't let's start slinging accusations about." Blore said sullenly, "Well, I only suggested the doctor had made a mistake." Dr. Armstrong smiled with effort. He said, showing his teeth in a somewhat mirthless smile, "Doctors can't afford to make mistakes of that kind, my friend." Blore said deliberately, "Well, it wouldn't be the first you've made if that gramophone record is to be believed." Armstrong went white. Philip Lombard said quickly and angrily to Blore, "What's the sense of making yourself offensive? We're all in the same boat. We've got to pull together. What about your own pretty little spot of perjury?" Blore took a step forward, his hands clenched. He said in a thick voice, "Perjury be damned, that's a foul lie. You may try and shut me up, Mr. Lombard, but there's things I want to know, and one of them's about you." Lombard's eyebrows rose. "About me?" "Yes. I want to know why you brought a revolver down here on a pleasant social visit." Lombard said, "You do you?" "Well, yes, I do, Mr. Lombard." Lombard said unexpectedly, "You know, Blore, you're not nearly such a fool as you look." "Well, that's as may be. Well, what about that revolver?" Lombard smiled. "I brought it because I expected to run into a spot of trouble." Blore said suspiciously, "Well, you didn't tell us that last night." Lombard shook his head. "Well, you were holding out on us," Blore persisted. "In a way, yes," said Lombard. "Well, come on, out with it." Lombard said slowly, "I allowed you all to think that I was asked here in the same way as most of the others. That's not quite true. As a matter of fact, I was approached by a mysterious Johnny. Morris, his name was. He offered me 100 guineas to come down here and keep my eyes open. Said I'd got a reputation for being a good man in a tight place." "Well?" Blore prompted impatiently. Lombard said with a grin, "That's all." Dr. Armstrong said, "But surely he told you more than that." "Oh, no he didn't. Just shut up like a clam." I could take it or leave it. Those were his words. I was hard up, so I took it. Blore looked unconvinced. He said, "Why didn't you tell us this all last night?" "My dear man." Lombard shrugged eloquent shoulders. "How was I to know that last night wasn't exactly the eventuality I was here to cope with? I lay low and told a non-committal story." Dr. Armstrong said shrewdly, "But now you think differently." Lombard's face changed. It darkened and hardened. He said, "Yes, I believe now that I'm in the same boat as the rest of you. That 100 guineas was just Mr. Owen's little bit of cheese to get me into the trap along with the rest of you." He said slowly, "For we are in a trap. I'll take my oath on that. Mrs. Rogers' death, Tony Marston's, the disappearing Indian boys on the dinner table. Oh yes, Mr. Owen's hand is plainly to be seen, but where the devil is Mr. Owen himself?" Downstairs, the gong pealed a solemn call to lunch. Rogers was standing by the dining room door. As the three men descended the stairs, he moved a step or two forward. He said in a low, anxious voice, "I hope lunch will be satisfactory. There's cold ham and cold tongue, and I've boiled some potatoes. And there's cheese and biscuits and some tinned fruits." Lombard said, "Sounds all right. Stores are holding out then?" "There is plenty of food, sir, of a tinned variety. The larder is very well stocked.
A necessity, that I should say, sir, on an island where one may be cut off from the mainland for a considerable period.
Lombard nodded. Rogers murmured as he followed the three men into the dining room.
It worries me that Fred Narracott hasn't been over today. It's peculiarly unfortunate, as you might say.
Yes, said Lombard. Peculiarly unfortunate describes it very well. Miss Brent came into the room. She had just dropped a ball of wool and was carefully rewinding the end of it. As she took her seat at table, she remarked, "The weather is changing. The wind is quite strong, and there are white horses on the sea." Mr. Justice Wargrave came in. He walked with a slow, measured tread. He darted quick looks from under his bushy eyebrows at the other occupants of the dining room. He said,
"You have had an active morning."
There was a faint, malicious pleasure in his voice. Vera Claythorne hurried in. She was a little out of breath. She said quickly, "I hope you didn't wait for me. Am I late?" Emily Brent said, "You're not the last. The General isn't here yet." They sat round the table. Rogers addressed Miss Brent.
"Will you begin, madam, or will you wait?"
Vera said, "General MacArthur is sitting right down by the sea. I don't expect he would hear the gong there, and anyway—" She hesitated. "He's a little vague today, I think." Rogers said quickly,
"I will go down and inform him luncheon is ready."
Dr. Armstrong jumped up. "I'll go," he said. "You others start lunch." He left the room. Behind him, he heard Roger's voice.
"Will you take the cold tongue or the cold ham, madam?"
That old man is sus. They're all sus. The five people sitting round the table seemed to find conversation difficult. Outside, sudden gusts of wind came up and died away. Vera shivered a little and said, "There's a storm coming." Blore made a contribution to the discourse. He said conversationally, "Well, there was an old fellow in the train from Plymouth yesterday. He kept saying a storm was coming. Wonderful how they know weather, those old salts." Rogers went round the table collecting the meat plates. Suddenly, with the plates held in his hands, he stopped. He said in an odd, scared voice,
"There's somebody running."
They could all hear it. Running feet along the terrace. In that minute, they knew without being told. As by common accord, they all rose to their feet. They stood, looking towards the door. Dr. Armstrong appeared, his breath coming fast. He said, "General MacArthur, dead!" The word burst from Vera explosively. Armstrong said, "Yes, he's dead." There was a pause, a long pause. 7 people looked at each other and could find no words to say. The storm broke just as the old man's body was borne in through the door. The others were standing in the hall. There was a sudden hiss and roar as the wind and the rain came down. As Blore and Armstrong passed up the stairs with their burden, Vera Claythorne turned suddenly and went into the deserted dining room. It was as they had left it. The sweet course stood ready on the sideboard, untasted. Vera went up to the table. She was there a minute or two later when Rogers came softly into the room. He started when he saw her. Then his eyes asked a question. He said,
"Oh, miss, I just came to see."
In a loud, harsh voice that surprised herself, Vera said, You're quite right, Rogers. Look for yourself. There are only 7. General MacArthur had been laid on his bed. After making a last examination, Armstrong left the room and came downstairs. He found the others assembled in the drawing room. Miss Brent was knitting. Vera Claythorne was standing by the window looking out at the hissing rain. Blore was sitting squarely in a chair, his hands on his knees. Lombard was walking restlessly up and down. At the far end of the room, Mr. Justice Wargrave was sitting in a grandfather chair. His eyes were half closed. They opened as the doctor came into the room. He said in a clear, penetrating voice,
"Well, Doctor?"
Armstrong was very pale. He said, "No question of heart failure or anything like that. MacArthur was hit with a life preserver or some such thing on the back of the head." A little murmur went round, but the clear voice of the judge was raised once more.
"Did you find the actual weapon used?"
No.
"Nevertheless, you are sure of your facts?"
I am quite sure. Mr. Justice Wargrave said quietly,
"We know now exactly where we are."
There was no doubt now who was in charge of the situation. This morning, Wargrave had sat huddled in his chair on the terrace, refraining from any overt activity. Now he assumed command with the ease born of a long habit of authority. He definitely presided over this court. Clearing his throat, he once more spoke.
"This morning, gentlemen, whilst I was sitting on the terrace, I was an observer of your activities. There could be little doubt of your purpose. You were searching the island for an unknown murderer."
"Quite right, sir," said Philip Lombard. The judge went on.
"You had come, doubtless, to the same conclusion that I had, namely that the deaths of Anthony Marston and Mrs. Rogers were neither accidental nor were they suicides. No doubt you also reached a certain conclusion as to the purpose of Mr. Owen in enticing us to this island."
Blore said hoarsely,
He's a madman. Halloony!
The judge coughed.
"That's almost certainly. But it hardly affects the issue. Our main preoccupation is this: to save our lives."
Armstrong said in a trembling voice, "There's no one on the island, I tell you. No one." The judge stroked his jaw. He said gently,
"In the sense you mean, no. I came to that conclusion early this morning. I could have told you that your search would be fruitless. Nevertheless, I am strongly of the opinion that Mr. Owen, to give him the name he himself has adopted, is on the island. Very much so. Given the scheme in question, which is neither more nor less than the execution of justice upon certain individuals for offenses which the law cannot touch, there is only one way in which that scheme could be accomplished. Mr. Owen can only come to the island in one way. It's perfectly clear. Mr. Owen is one of us."
"Oh, no, no, no." It was Vera who burst out, almost in a moan. The judge turned a keen eye on her. He said,
"My dear young lady, this is no time for refusing to look facts in the face. We're all in grave danger. One of us is UN Owen, and we do not know which of us. Of the 10 people who came to this island, 3 are definitely cleared. Anthony Marston, Mrs. Rogers, and General MacArthur have gone beyond suspicion."
Pause. I've played Danganronpa. Nobody is above suspicion. Anyway.
"Anthony Marston, Mrs. Rogers, and General MacArthur have gone beyond suspicion. There are 7 of us left. Of those 7, one is, if I may so express myself, a bogus little soldier boy.
He paused and looked round.
Do I take it that you all agree?
Armstrong said, "It's fantastic, but I suppose you're right." Quick pause, fantastic here, meaning, of incredulity and bizarre and, basically fantastic back then meant something slightly different than what it means now, just to help. Okay, unpause. Blore said,
Not a doubt of it. And if you ask me, I've a very good idea.
A quick gesture of Mr. Justice Wargrave's hand stopped him. The judge said quietly,
We will come to that presently. At the moment, all I wish to establish is that we are in agreement on the facts.
Emily Brent, still knitting, said, "Your argument seems logical. I agree that one of us is possessed by a devil." Vera murmured, "I can't believe it. I can't." Wargrave said,
Lombard?
"I agree, sir. Absolutely." The judge nodded his head in a satisfied manner. He said,
Now, let us examine the evidence. To begin with, is there any reason for suspecting one particular person? Mr. Blore, you have, I think, something to say.
Blore was breathing hard. He said,
Lombard's got a revolver. He didn't tell the truth last night. He admits it.
Philip Lombard smiled scornfully. He said, "I suppose I'd better explain again." He did so, telling the story briefly and succinctly. Blore said sharply,
What's to prove it? There's nothing to corroborate your story.
The judge coughed.
Unfortunately, he said, we're all in that position. There is only our own word to go upon.
He leaned forward.
Have none of you yet grasped what a very peculiar situation this is? To my mind, there is only one course of procedure to adopt. Is there anyone whom we can definitely eliminate from suspicion on the evidence which is in our possession?
Dr. Armstrong said quickly, "I am a well-known professional man. The mere idea that I can be suspected of..." Again, a gesture of the judge's hand arrested a speaker before he finished his speech. Mr. Justice Wargrave said in his small, clear voice,
I too am a well-known person, but my dear sir, that proves less than nothing. Doctors have gone mad before now. Judges have gone mad. So, he added, looking at Blore, have policemen.
Lombard said, "At any rate, I suppose you'll leave the women out of it?" The judge's eyebrows rose. He said in the famous acid tone that counsel knew so well,
Do I understand you to assert that women are not subject to homicidal mania?
Lombard said irritably, "Of course not. But all the same, it hardly seems possible." He stopped. Mr. Justice Wargrave, still in the same thin, sour voice, addressed Armstrong.
I take it, Dr. Armstrong, that a woman would have been physically incapable of striking the blow that killed poor MacArthur?
The doctor said calmly, "Perfectly capable, given a suitable instrument, such as a rubber truncheon or cosh." Pausing real quick to look that up. A rubber truncheon is apparently a police baton. Or a billy club. And a kosh appears to be a different type of baton. I think? I'm getting math stuff, so it's hard to say. But essentially, Armstrong is saying, well, if you have a club, anyone could do someone in if you hit him in the back of the head. Okay, unpause. Where was I? Ah, yes.
It would require no undue exertion of force?
Not at all. Mr. Justice Wargrave wriggled his tortoise-like neck. He said,
The other two deaths have resulted from the administration of drugs. That, no one will dispute, is easily compassed by a person of the smallest physical strength.
Vera cried angrily, I think you're mad! His eyes turned slowly till they rested on her. It was the dispassionate stare of a man well used to weighing humanity in the balance. She thought, he's just seeing me as a specimen. And the thought came to her with real surprise. He doesn't like me much. In measured tones, the judge was saying,
My dear young lady, do try and restrain your feelings. I'm not accusing you.
He bowed to Miss Brent.
I hope, Miss Brent, that you are not offended by my insistence that all of us are equally under suspicion.
Emily Brent was knitting. She did not look up. In a cold voice, she said, The idea that I should be accused of taking a fellow creature's life, not to speak of the lives of 3 fellow creatures, is, of course, quite absurd to anyone who knows anything of my character. But I quite appreciate the fact that we are all strangers to one another, and that in those circumstances nobody can be exonerated without the fullest proof. There is, as I have said, a devil amongst us. The judge said,
Then we are agreed. There can be no elimination on the ground of character or position alone.
Lombard said, What about Rogers? The judge looked at him unblinkingly.
What about him?
Lombard said, Well, to my mind, Rogers seems pretty well ruled out. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
Indeed? And on what grounds?
Lombard said, He hasn't got the brains, for one thing. And for another, his wife was one of the victims. The judge's heavy eyebrows rose once more. He said,
In my time, young men, several people have come before me accused of the murders of their wives, and have been found guilty.
Oh, I agree. Wife murder is perfectly possible, almost natural, let's say, but not this particular kind. I can believe in Rogers killing his wife because he was scared of her breaking down and giving him away, or because he'd taken a dislike to her, or because he wanted to link up with some nice little bit rather less long in the tooth. But I can't see him as the lunatic Mr. Owen dealing out crazy justice and starting on his own wife for a crime they both committed. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
You are assuming hearsay to the evidence. We do not know that Rogers and his wife conspired to murder their employer. That may have been a false statement, made so that Rogers should appear to be in the same position as ourselves. Mrs. Rogers' terror last night may have been due to the fact that she realized her husband was mentally unhinged.
Lombard said, Well, have it your own way. You and Owen is one of us. No exceptions allowed, we all qualify. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
My point is that there can be no exceptions allowed on the score of character, position, or probability. What we must now examine is the possibility of eliminating one or more persons on the facts. To put it simply, is there among us one or more persons who could not possibly have administered either cyanide to Anthony Marston or an overdose of sleeping draught to Mrs. Rogers, and who had no opportunity of striking the blow that killed General MacArthur?
Blor's rather heavy face lit up. He leant forward.
Well, now you're talking, sir,
He said,
Well, that's the stuff. Let's go into it. As regards young Marston, I don't think there's anything to be done. It's already been suggested that someone from outside slipped something into the dregs of his glass before he refilled it for the last time. A person actually in the room could have done that even more easily. I can't remember if Rogers was in the room. Any of us could certainly have done it.
He paused, then went on.
I'll take the woman Rogers. A person who stood out there.
Her husband and the doctor, either of them could have done it as easy as winking. Armstrong sprang to his feet. He was trembling. I protest. This is absolutely uncalled for. I swear that the dose I gave the woman was perfectly...
Dr. Armstrong?
The small, sour voice was compelling. The doctor stopped with a jerk. In the middle of his sentence, the small, cold voice went on.
Your indignation is very natural. Nevertheless, you must admit that the facts have got to be faced. Either you or Rogers could have administered a fatal dose with the greatest ease. Let us now consider the position of the other people present. What chance had I, had Inspector Bloor, had Miss Brent, had Miss Claythorne, had Mr. Lombard of administering poison? Can any one of us be completely and entirely eliminated?
He paused.
I think not.
Vera said angrily, I was nowhere near the woman. All of you can swear to that. Mr. Justice Wargrave waited a minute, then he said,
As far as my memory serves me, the facts were these. Will anyone please correct me if I make a misstatement? Mrs. Rogers was lifted onto the sofa by Anthony Marston and Mr. Lombard, and Dr. Armstrong went to her. He sent Rogers for brandy. There was then a question raised as to where the voice we had just heard had come from. We all went into the next room with the exception of Miss Brent, who remained in this room alone with an unconscious woman.
A spot of color came into Emily Brent's cheeks. She stopped knitting. She said, This is outrageous. The remorseless small voice went on.
When we returned to this room, you, Miss Brent, were bending over the woman on the sofa.
Emily Brent said, Is common humanity a criminal offense? Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
I am only establishing facts. Rogers then entered the room with the brandy, which, of course, he could quite well have doctored before entering the room. The brandy was administered to the woman, and shortly afterwards, her husband and Dr. Armstrong assisted her up to bed, where Dr. Armstrong gave her the sedative.
Bloor said, Well, that's what happened. Absolutely. That lets out the judge, Mr. Lombard, myself, and Miss Claythorne. His voice was loud and jubilant. Mr. Justice Wargrave, bringing a cold eye to bear upon him, murmured,
Oh, but does it? We must take into account every possible eventuality.
Bloor stared. He said, I don't get you. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
Upstairs in her room, Mrs. Rogers is lying in bed. The sedative that the doctor has given her begins to take effect. She's vaguely sleepy and acquiescent. Supposing that at that moment there's a tap on the door and someone enters bringing her, shall we say, a tablet or a draft, with the message that the doctor says you're to take this. Do you imagine for 1 minute that she would not have swallowed it obediently without thinking twice about it?
There was silence. Bloor shifted his feet and frowned. Philip Lombard said, I don't believe in that story for a minute. Besides, none of us left this room for hours afterwards. There was Marston's death and all the rest of it. The judge said,
Someone could have left his or her bedroom later.
Lombard objected, but then Rogers would have been up there. Dr. Armstrong stirred.
No, he said. Rogers went downstairs to clean up in the dining room and pantry. Anyone could have gone up to the woman's bedroom then without being seen.
Emily Brent said, Surely, Doctor, the women would have been fast asleep by then under the influence of the drug you had administered.
In all likelihood, yes. But it is not a certainty. Until you have prescribed for a patient more than once, you cannot tell their reaction to different drugs. There is sometimes a considerable period before a sedative takes effect. It depends on the personal idiosyncrasy of the patient towards that particular drug.
Lombard said, Of course you would say that. Suits your book, eh? Again, Armstrong's face darkened with anger. But again, that passionless, cold little voice stopped the words on his lips.
No good result can come from recrimination. Facts are what we have to deal with. It is established, I think, that there is a possibility of such a thing as I have outlined occurring. I agree that its probability value is not high, though there again it depends on who that person might have been. The appearance of Miss Brent or of Miss Claythorne on such an errand would have occasioned no surprise in the patient's mind. I agree that the appearance of myself, or of Mr. Bloor, or of Mr. Lombard could have been, to say the least of it, unusual. But I still think the visit would have been received without the awakening of any real suspicion.
Bloor said, and that gets us... where? Mr. Justice Wargrave, stroking his lip and looking quite passionless and inhuman, said,
We have now dealt with the second killing, and have established the fact that no one of us can be completely exonerated from suspicion.
He paused and went on.
We come now to the death of General MacArthur. That took place this morning. I will ask anyone who considers that he or she has an alibi to state it in so many words. I myself will state at once I have no valid alibi. I spent the morning sitting on the terrace and meditating on the singular position in which we all find ourselves. I sat on that chair on the terrace for the whole morning until the gong went. But there were, I should imagine, several periods during the morning when I was quite unobserved, and during which it would have been possible for me to walk down to the sea, kill the general, and return to my chair. There's only my word for the fact that I never left the terrace. In the circumstances, that is not enough. There must be proof.
Bloor said, well, I was with Mr. Lombard and Dr. Armstrong all the morning. They'll bear me out. Dr. Armstrong said, you went to the house for a rope. Bloor said, well, of course I did. Went straight there and straight back. You know I did. Armstrong said, you were a long time. Bloor turned crimson. He said, what the hell do you mean by that, Dr. Armstrong? Armstrong repeated, I only said you were a long time. Had to find it, didn't I? Can't lay your hands on a coil of rope all in a minute. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
During Inspector Bloor's absence, were you two gentlemen together?
Armstrong said hotly, certainly. That is, Lombard went off for a few minutes. I remained where I was. Lombard said with a smile, I wanted to test the possibility of heliographing to the mainland. Wanted to find the best spot. I was only absent a minute or two. Armstrong nodded. He said, That's right. Not long enough to do a murder, I assure you. The judge said,
Did either of you two glance at your watches?
Well, no. Philip Lombard said, I wasn't wearing one. The judge said evenly,
A minute or two is a vague expression.
He turned his head to the upright figure with the knitting lying on her lap.
Miss Brent?
Emily Brent said, I took a walk with Miss Claythorne up to the top of the island. Afterwards, I sat on the terrace in the sun. The judge said,
I don't think I noticed you there.
No, I was round the corner of the house to the east. It was out of the wind there.
And you sat there till lunchtime?
Yes.
Miss Claythorne?
Vera answered readily and clearly.
I was with Miss Brent early this morning. After that, I wandered about a bit. Then I went down and talked to General MacArthur.
Mr. Justice Wargrave interrupted. He said,
What time was that?
Vera, for the first time, was vague.
She said, I don't know. About an hour before lunch, I think. Or it might have been less.
Bloor asked, Was it after we spoken to him or before?
Vera said, I don't know. He was very queer.
She shivered.
In what way was he queer?
The judge wanted to know. Vera said in a low voice,
He said we were all going to die. He said he was waiting for the end. He frightened me.
The judge nodded. He said,
What did you do next?
I went back to the house. Then just before lunch, I went out again and up behind the house. I've been terribly restless all day.
Mr. Justice Wargrave stroked his chin. He said,
Well, there remains Rogers, though I doubt if his evidence will add anything to our sum of knowledge.
Rogers, summoned before the court, had little to tell. He had been busy all the morning about household duties and with the preparation of lunch. He had taken cocktails onto the terrace before lunch and had then gone up to remove his things from the attic to another room. He had not looked out of the window during the morning and had not seen anything that could have any bearing upon the death of General MacArthur. He would swear definitely that there had been 8 china figures upon the dining table when he laid the table for lunch. At the conclusion of Roger's evidence, there was a pause. Mr. Justice Wargrave cleared up his throat. Lombard murmured to Vera Claythorne, "The summing up will now take place." The judge said,
We have inquired into the circumstances of these 3 deaths to the best of our ability. Whilst probability in some cases is against certain people being implicated, yet we cannot say definitely that any one person can be considered as cleared of all complicity. I reiterate my positive belief that of the 7 persons assembled in this room, 1 is a dangerous, probably insane criminal. There's no evidence before us as to who that person is. All we can do at the present juncture is to consider what measures we can take for communicating with the mainland for help. And in the event of help being delayed, as is only too possible given the state of the weather, what measures we must adopt to ensure our safety. I would ask you all to consider this carefully and to give me any suggestions that may occur to you. In the meantime, I warn everybody to be upon his or her guard. So far, the murderer has had an easy task, since his victims have been unsuspicious. From now on, it is our task to suspect each and every one amongst us. Forewarned is forearmed. Take no risks and be alert to danger. That is all.
Philip Lombard murmured beneath his breath, "Court is now adjourned." And that takes us to the end of chapter 9. I believe that's the longest chapter of this round. I'm going to take a quick water break. I'll be right back. Make sure you do as well. And, of course, unshrimp yourself. Be right back. Hello, hello, I am back. My throat is a little bit more hydrated, so let's keep going. Oh, and by the way, hi Frank. Hope you're enjoying the show. Chapter 10. Do you believe it? Vera asked. She and Philip Lombard sat on the windowsill of the living room. Outside, the rain poured down and the wind howled in great shuddering gusts against the window panes. Philip Lombard cocked his head slightly on one side before answering. Then he said, "You mean, do I believe that old Wargrave is right when he says it's one of us?" "Yes." Philip Lombard said slowly, "It's difficult to say. Logically, you know he's right, and yet..." Vera took the words out of his mouth. "And yet, it seems so incredible." Philip Lombard made a grimace. The whole thing's incredible. But after MacArthur's death, there's no more doubt as to one thing. There's no question now of accidents or suicides. It's definitely murder. 3 murders up to date. Vera shivered. She said, "It's like some awful dream. I keep feeling that things like this can't happen." He said with understanding, "I know. Presently a tap will come on the door and early morning tea will be brought in." Vera said, "Oh, how I wish that could happen." Philip Lombard said gravely, "Yes, but it won't. We're all in the dream. And we've got to be pretty much upon our guard from now on." Vera said, lowering her voice, If it is one of them, which do you think it is?" Philip Lombard grinned suddenly. He said, "I take it you're accepting our 2 selves. Well, that's all right. I know very well that I'm not the murderer, and I don't fancy that there's anything insane about you, Vera. You strike me as being one of the sanest, most level-headed girls I've come across. I'd stake my reputation on your sanity." With a slightly wry smile, Vera said, "Thank you." He said, "Come now, Miss Vera Claythorne, aren't you going to return the compliment?" Vera hesitated a minute, then she said, "You've admitted, you know, that you don't hold human life particularly sacred. But all the same, I can't see you as the man who dictated that gramophone record." Lombard said, "Quite right. If I were to commit 1 or more murders, it would be solely for what I could get out of them. This mass clearance isn't my line of country." "Good. Then we'll eliminate ourselves and concentrate on our 5 fellow prisoners. Which of them is you and Owen?" "Well, at a guess, and with absolutely nothing to go on, I'd plump for Wargrave." "Oh!" Vera sounded surprised. She thought a minute or 2 and then said, "Why?" "Hard to say exactly, but to begin with, he's an old man, and he's been presiding over courts of law for years. That's to say, he's played God Almighty for a good many months every year. That must go to a man's head eventually. He gets to see himself as all-powerful, as holding the power of life or death, and it's possible that his brain might snap and he might want to go one step farther and be executioner and judge extraordinary." Vera said slowly, "Yes, I suppose that's possible." Lombard said, "Well, who do you plump for?" Without any hesitation, Vera answered, "Dr. Armstrong." Lombard let out a low whistle. "The doctor, eh? You know, I should have put him last of all." Vera shook her head. "Oh, no. 2 of the deaths have been poison. That rather points to a doctor. And then you can't get over the fact that the only thing we're certain Mrs. Rogers had was the sleeping draught that he gave her." Lombard admitted, "Yes, that's true." Vera persisted. "If a doctor went mad, it would be a long time before anyone suspected, and doctors overwork and have a lot of strain." Philip Lombard said, "Yes, but I doubt if he could have killed MacArthur. He wouldn't have had time during that brief interval when I left him. Not, that is, unless he's fairly hair down there and back again, and I doubt if he's in good enough training to do that and show no signs of it." Vera said, "He didn't do it then. He had an opportunity later."
When?
"When he went down to call the general to lunch." Philip whistled again, very softly. He said, "So you think he did it then? Pretty cool thing to do." Vera said, impatient,
Who is it? Who is it, Mr. Bloor? That's what I want to know. Who is it?
Roger's face was working. His hands were clenched tightly round the polishing leather that he had just been using. Ex-Inspector Bloor said, My lad, that's the question." "One of us," his lordship said. "Which one? That's what I want to know. Who's the fiend in human form?" "That," said Bloor, "is what we would all like to know." Roger said shrewdly,
But you've got an idea, Mr. Bloor. You've got an idea, haven't you?
"I may have an idea," said Bloor slowly. "Well, that's a long way from being sure. I may be wrong. All I can say is that if I'm right, the person in question is a very cool customer. Very cool customer indeed." Rogers wiped the perspiration from his forehead. He said hoarsely,
It's like a bad dream, that's what this is.
Bloor said, looking at him curiously, "Got any ideas yourself, Rogers?" The butler shook his head. He said hoarsely,
I don't know. I don't know at all. And that's what's frightening the life out of me. I have no idea.
Dr. Armstrong said violently, "We must get out of here. We must. We must at all costs." Mr. Justice Wargrave looked thoughtfully out of the smoking room window. He played with the cord of his eyeglasses. He said,
I do not, of course, profess to be a weather prophet, but I should say that it is very unlikely that a boat could reach us, even if they knew of our plight, under 24 hours, and even then only if the wind drops.
Dr. Armstrong dropped his head in his hands and groaned. He said, "And in the meantime, we may all be murdered in our beds?"
I hope not.
said Mr. Justice Wargrave.
I intend to take every possible precaution against such a thing happening.
It flashed across Dr. Armstrong's mind that an old man like the judge was far more tenacious of life than a younger man would be. He had often marveled at that fact in his professional career. Here was he, junior to the judge by perhaps 20 years, and yet with a vastly inferior sense of self-preservation. Mr. Justice Wargrave was thinking,
Murdered in our beds. These doctors are all the same. They think in cliches. A thoroughly commonplace mind.
The doctor said, "There have been 3 victims already, remember?"
Certainly, but you must remember they were unprepared for the attack. We are forewarned.
Dr. Armstrong said bitterly, "What can we do? Sooner or later,"
I think
said Mr. Justice Wargrave.
there are several things we can do.
Armstrong said, "We've no idea even who it can be." The judge stroked his chin and murmured,
Oh, I wouldn't quite say that.
Armstrong stared at him. "Do you mean you know?" Mr. Justice Wargrave said cautiously,
As regards actual evidence, such as is necessary in court, I admit that I have none. But it appears to me reviewing the whole business, that one particular person is sufficiently clearly indicated. Yes, I think so.
Armstrong stared at him. He said, I don't understand. Miss Brent was upstairs in her bedroom. She took up her Bible and went to sit by the window. She opened it. Then, after a minute's hesitation, she set it aside and went over to the dressing table. From a drawer in it, she took out a small, black-covered notebook. She opened it and began writing.
A terrible thing has happened. General MacArthur is dead. His cousin married Elsie Macpherson. There's no doubt but that he was murdered. After luncheon, the judge made us a most interesting speech. He is convinced that the murderer is one of us. That means that one of us is possessed by a devil. I had already suspected that. Which of us is it? They're all asking themselves that. I alone know.
She sat for some time without moving. Her eyes grew vague and filmy. The pencil straggled drunkenly in her fingers. In shaking loose capitals, she wrote,
The murderer's name is Beatrice Taylor.
Her eyes closed. Suddenly, with a start, she awoke. She looked down at the notebook. With an angry exclamation, she scored through the vague, unevenly scrawled characters of the last sentence. She said in a low voice,
Did I write that? Did I? I must be going mad.
The storm increased. The wind howled against the side of the house. Everyone was in the living room. They sat listlessly huddled together, and surreptitiously they watched each other. When Rogers brought in the tea tray, they all jumped. He said,
Shall I draw the curtains? It would make it more cheerful like.
Receiving an assent to this, the curtains were drawn and the lamps turned on. The room grew more cheerful. A little of the shadow lifted. Surely by tomorrow the storm would be over and someone would come. A boat would arrive. Vera Claythorne said,
Will you pour out tea, Miss Brent?
The elder woman replied,
No, you do it, dear. The teapot is so heavy, and I have lost 2 skeins of my grey knitting wool. So annoying.
Vera moved to the tea table. There was a cheerful rattle and clink of china. Normality returned. Tea. Blessed, ordinary, everyday afternoon tea. Philip Lombard made a cheery remark. Blore responded. Dr. Armstrong told a humorous story. Mr. Justice Wargrave, who ordinarily hated tea, sipped approvingly. Into this relaxed atmosphere came Rogers, and Rogers was upset. He said nervously and at random,
Excuse me, sir, but does anyone know what's become of the bathroom curtain?
Lombard's head went up with a jerk. The bathroom curtain? What the devil do you mean, Rogers?
It's gone, sir. Clean vanished. I was going round drawing all the curtains, and the one in the bathroom wasn't there any longer.
Mr. Justice Wargrave asked,
Was it there this morning?
Oh, yes, sir.
Blore said, What kind of a curtain was it?
Scarlet oil silk, sir. It went with the scarlet tiles.
Lombard said, And it's gone?
Gone, sir.
They stared at each other. Blore said heavily, Well, after all, what of it? It's mad, but so is everything else. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You can't kill anybody with an oil silk curtain. Forget about it. Rogers said,
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
He went out, shutting the door behind him. Inside the room, The pall of fear had fallen anew. Again, surreptitiously, they watched each other. Dinner came, was eaten, and cleared away. A simple meal, mostly out of tins. Afterwards, in the living room, the strain was almost too great to be borne. At 9 o'clock, Emily Brent rose to her feet. She said,
I'm going to bed. Vera said, I'll go to bed too.
The two women went up the stairs, and Lombard and Blore came with them. Standing at the top of the stairs, the two men watched the women go into their respective rooms and shut the doors. They heard the sound of two bolts being shot and the turning of two keys. Blore said with a grin,
No need to tell them to lock their doors.
Lombard said, Well, they're all right for the night at any rate. He went down again and the other followed him. The four men went to bed an hour later. They went up together. Rogers, from the dining room where he was setting the table for breakfast, saw them go up. He heard them pause on the landing above. Then the judge's voice spoke.
I need hardly advise you, gentlemen, to lock your doors.
Blore said, And what's more, put a chair under the handle. There are ways of turning locks from the outside. Lombard murmured, My dear Blore, the trouble with you is you know too much. The judge said gravely,
Good night, gentlemen. May we all meet safely in the morning.
Rogers came out of the dining room and slipped halfway up the stairs. He saw four figures pass through four doors and heard the turning of four locks and the shooting of four bolts. He nodded his head.
That's all right,
He muttered. He went back into the dining room. Yes, everything was ready for the morning. His eye lingered on the center plaque of looking glass and the 7 little china figures. A sudden grin transformed his face. He murmured,
I'll see no one plays tricks tonight at any rate.
Crossing the room, he locked the door to the pantry. Then, going through the other door to the hall, he pulled the door to, locked it, and slipped the key into his pocket. Then, extinguishing the lights, he hurried up the stairs and into his new bedroom. There was only one possible hiding place in it, the tall wardrobe, and he looked into that immediately. Then, locking and bolting the door, he prepared for bed. He said to himself,
No more little tricks tonight. I've seen to that.
Chapter 11. Philip Lombard had the habit of waking at daybreak. He did so on this particular morning. He raised himself on an elbow and listened. The wind had somewhat abated but was still blowing. He could hear no sound of rain. At 8 o'clock the wind was blowing more strongly, but Lombard did not hear it. He was asleep again. At 9:30 he was sitting on the edge of his bed looking at his watch. He put it to his ear. Then his lips drew back from his teeth in that curious wolf-like smile characteristic of the man. He said very softly, I think the time has come to do something about this. At 25 minutes to 10, he was tapping on the closed door of Blore's room. The latter opened it cautiously. His hair was tousled and his eyes were still dim with sleep. Philip Lombard said affably, Sleeping the clock round? Well, shows you've got an easy conscience. Blore said shortly, What's the matter? Lombard answered, Anybody called you? Or brought you any tea? Do you know what time it is? Blore looked over his shoulder at a small traveling clock by his bedside. He said, 25 to 10. Wouldn't have believed I could have slept like that. Where's Rogers? Philip Lombard said, "It's a case of echo answers where?"
What do you mean?
asked the other sharply. Lombard said, "I mean that Rogers is missing. He isn't in his room or anywhere else. And there's no kettle on. And the kitchen fire isn't even lit." Blore swore under his breath. He said,
Where the devil can he be? Out on the island somewhere? Wait till I get some clothes on. See if the others know anything.
Philip Lombard nodded. He moved along the line of closed doors. He found Armstrong up and nearly dressed. Mr. Justice Wargrave, like Blore, had to be roused from sleep. Vera Claythorne was dressed. Emily Brent's room was empty. The little party moved through the house. Roger's room, as Philip Lombard had already ascertained, was untenanted. The bed had been slept in, and his razor and sponge and soap were wet. Lombard said, "He got up all right." Vera said in a low voice, which she tried to make firm, and answered,
You don't think he's hiding somewhere, waiting for us?
Lombard said, "My dear girl, I'm prepared to think anything of anyone. My advice is that we keep together until we find him." Armstrong said, "He must be out on the island somewhere." Blore, who had joined them, dressed but still unshaved, said,
Where's Miss Brent got to? That's another mystery.
but as they arrived in the hall, Emily Brent came in through the front door. She had on a Macintosh. She had a computer? Pause. I'm gonna try to look that up. It is a type of coat. Yeah, it appears to be a type of raincoat or jacket. Okay. So, where was I? Ah, yes. She had on a Macintosh. She said,
The sea is as high as ever. I shouldn't think any boat could put out today.
Blore said, "Have you been wandering about the island alone, Miss Brent? Don't you realize that that's an exceedingly foolish thing to do?"
Emily Brent said, I assure you, Mr. Blore, that I kept an incredibly, extremely sharp lookout.
Blore grunted. He said,
Seen anything of Rogers?
Miss Brent's eyebrows rose.
Rogers? No, I haven't seen him this morning. Why?
Mr. Justice Wargrave, shaved, dressed, and with his false tooth in position, came down the stairs. He moved to the open dining room door. He said,
Laid the table for breakfast, I see.
Lombard said, He might have done that last night. They all moved inside the room, looked at the neatly set plates and cutlery, at the row of cups on the sideboard, at the felt mats placed ready for the coffee urn. It was Vera who saw it first. She caught the judge's arm, and the grip of her athletic fingers made the old gentleman wince. She cried out,
The figures! Look!
There were only 6 china figures in the middle of the table. They found him shortly afterwards. He was in the little wash house across the yard. He had been chopping sticks in preparation for lighting the kitchen fire. The small chopper was still in his hand. A bigger chopper, a heavy affair, was leaning against the door. The metal of it stained a dull brown. It corresponded only too well with the deep wound in the back of Roger's head. perfectly clear," said Armstrong. The murderer must have crept up behind him, swung the chopper once, and brought it down on his head as he was bending over. Bloor was busy on the handle of the chopper and the flour sifter from the kitchen. Mr. Justice Wargrave asked,
"Would it have needed great force, Doctor?"
Armstrong said gravely, "A woman could have done it, if that's what you mean." He gave a quick glance round. Vera Claythorne and Emily Brent had retired to the kitchen. The girl could have done it easily. She's an athletic type. In appearance, Miss Brent is fragile looking, but that type of woman has often a lot of wiry strength. And you must remember that anyone who's mentally unhinged has a good deal of unsuspected strength. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Bloor rose from his knees with a sigh. He said,
"No fingerprints. Handle was wiped afterwards."
A sound of laughter was heard. They turned sharply. Vera Claythorne was standing in the yard. She cried out in a high, shrill voice, shaken with wild bursts of laughter.
"Do they keep bees on this island? Tell me that. Where do we go for honey?"
They stared at her uncomprehendingly. It was as though the sane, well-balanced girl had gone mad before their very eyes. She went on in that high, unnatural voice.
"Don't stare like that, as though you thought I was mad. It's sane enough what I'm asking. Bees, hives, bees. Oh, don't you understand? Haven't you read that idiotic rhyme? It's up in all your bedrooms, put there for you to study. We might have come here straight away if we'd had sense. 7 little soldier boys chopping up sticks. And the next verse, I know the whole thing by heart, I tell you. 6 little soldier boys playing with a hive. And that's why I'm asking, do they keep bees on this island? Isn't it funny? Isn't it damn funny?"
She began laughing wildly again. Dr. Armstrong strode forward. He raised his hand and struck her a flat blow on the cheek. She gasped, hiccuped, and swallowed. She stood motionless a minute, then she said, "Thank you. I'm all right now." Her voice was once more calm and controlled, the voice of the efficient games mistress. She turned and went across the yard into the kitchen, saying, "Miss Brent and I are getting you breakfast. Can you bring some sticks to light the fire?" The marks of the doctor's hand stood out red on her cheek. As she went into the kitchen, Bloor said,
"Well, you dealt with that all right, Doctor."
Armstrong said apologetically, "Had to. We can't cope with hysteria on top of everything else." Philip Lombard said, "She's not a hysterical type." Armstrong agreed. "Oh, no. Good, healthy, sensible girl, just the sudden shock. It might happen to anybody." Rogers had chopped a certain amount of firewood before he had been killed. They gathered it up and took it into the kitchen. Vera and Emily Brent were busy. Miss Brent was raking out the stove. Vera was cutting the rind off the bacon. Emily Brent said,
"Thank you. We'll be as quick as we can. Say half an hour to 3/4. The kettle's got to boil."
Ex-Inspector Bloor said in a low, hoarse voice to Philip Lombard,
"Know what I'm thinking?"
Philip Lombard said, "As you're just about to tell me, it's not worth the trouble of guessing." Ex-Inspector Bloor was an earnest man. A light touch was incomprehensible to him. He went on heavily.
There was a case in America. Old gentleman and his wife, both killed with an axe. Middle of a morning. Nobody in the house, but their daughter and the maid. Maid, it was proved, couldn't have done it. Daughter was a respectable middle-aged spinster. Seemed incredible,
So incredible that they acquitted her. They never found any other explanation. He paused. I thought of that when I saw the axe. Then I went into the kitchen and saw her there so neat and calm. Hadn't done the hair. That girl coming out over hysterical. Well, that's natural. Sort of thing you'd expect, don't you think so? Philip Lombard said laconically, Might be. Blore went on, but the other, so neat and prim, wrapped up in that apron, Mrs. Rogers' apron, I suppose, saying breakfast will be ready in half an hour or so. You ask me, woman's as mad as a hatter. Lots of elderly spinsters go that way. I don't mean to go in for homicide on grand scale, but go queer in their heads. Unfortunately, it's taken her this way. Religious mania. Thinks she's God's instrument. Something of that kind. She sits in her room, you know, reading a Bible. Philip Lombard sighed and said, That's hardly proof positive of an unbalanced mentality, Blore. But Blore went on, ploddingly, perseveringly. And then she was out, in her mackintosh, said she'd been down to look at a sea. The other shook his head. He said, Rogers was killed as he was chopping firewood. That's to say, first thing when he got up. The Brent wouldn't have needed to wander about outside for hours afterwards. If you ask me, the murderer of Rogers would take jolly good care to be rolled up in bed snoring. Blore said, You're missing the point, Mr. Lombard. If a woman was innocent, she'd be too dead scared to go wandering about by herself. She'd only do that if she knew she had nothing to fear. That's to say, if she herself is the criminal. Philip Lombard said, That's a good point. Yes, I hadn't thought of that. He added with a faint grin, Glad you don't suspect me. Blore said rather shamefacedly, Well, I did start by thinking of you, that revolver, and the queer story you told, or didn't tell, but I've realized now that was really a bit too obvious. He paused and said, Hope you feel the same about me. Philip said thoughtfully, I may be wrong, of course, but I can't feel that you've got enough imagination for this job. All I can say is, if you're the criminal, you're a damn fine actor, and I take my hat off to you. He lowered his voice. Just between ourselves, Blore, and taking into account that we'll probably both be a couple of stiffs before another day is out, you did indulge in that spot of perjury, I suppose? Blore shifted uneasily from one foot to the other. He said at last, Don't seem to make much odds now. Oh well, there goes. Lander was innocent right enough. Gang had got me squared, and between us, we got him put away for a stretch. Mind you, I wouldn't admit this, if there were any witnesses, finished Lombard with a grin. It's just between you and me. Well, I hope you made a tidy bit out of it. Didn't make what I should have done. Mean crowd, the Purcell gang. Got my promotion, though. And Lander got penal servitude and died in prison. I couldn't know he was going to die, could I? Demanded Blore. No, that was your bad luck. Mine? His, you mean? Yours too, because as a result of it, it looks as though your own life is going to be cut unpleasantly short. Me? Blore stared at him. You think I'm going to go the way of Rogers and the rest of them? Not me. I'm watching out for myself pretty carefully, I can tell you. Lombard said, Oh well, I'm not a betting man. And anyway, if you were dead, I wouldn't get paid. Look here, Mr. Lombard. What do you mean? Philip Lombard showed his teeth. He said, I mean, my dear Blore, that in my opinion, you haven't got a chance. What? Your lack of imagination is going to make you absolutely a sitting target. A criminal of the imagination of U.N. Owen can make rings round you any time he or she wants to. Blore's face went crimson. He demanded angrily, And what about you? Philip Lombard's face went hard and dangerous. He said, I've got a pretty good imagination of my own. I've been in tight places before now and got out of them. I think. I won't say more than that, but I think I'll get out of this one. The eggs were in the frying pan. Vera at the stove thought to herself, "Why did I make a hysterical fool of myself? That was a mistake. Keep calm, my girl. Keep calm." After all, she'd always prided herself on her level-headedness. Miss Claythorne was wonderful. Kept her head. Started off swimming after Cyril at once. Why think of that now? All that was over. Over. Cyril had disappeared long before she got near the rock. She had felt the current take her, sweeping her out to sea. She had let herself go with it, swimming quietly, floating till the boat arrived at last. They had praised her courage and her sang-froid, but not Hugo. Hugo had just looked at her. God, how it hurt even now to think of Hugo. Where was he? What was he doing? Was he engaged? Married? Emily Brent said sharply,
Vera, that bacon is burning.
"Oh, sorry, Miss Brent, so it is. How stupid of me." Emily Brent lifted out the last egg from the sizzling fat. Vera, putting fresh pieces of bacon in the frying pan, said curiously,
You're wonderfully calm, Miss Brent.
Emily Brent said, pressing her lips together,
I was brought up to keep my head and never make a fuss.
Vera thought mechanically, repressed as a child. That accounts for a lot. She said, Aren't you afraid? She paused and added, Why, don't you mind dying? Dying? It was as though a sharp little gimlet had run into the solid congealed mass of Emily Brent's brain. Dying? But she wasn't going to die. The others would die, yes, but not she, Emily Brent. This girl didn't understand. Emily wasn't afraid, naturally. None of the Brents were afraid. All her people were service people. They faced death unflinchingly. They led upright lives, just as she, Emily Brent, had led an upright life. She had never done anything to be ashamed of, and so, naturally, she wasn't going to die.
The Lord is mindful of his own. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day.
It was daylight now. There was no terror.
We shall none of us leave this island.
Who had said that? General MacArthur, of course, whose cousin had married Elsie Macpherson. He hadn't seemed to care. He had seemed, actually, to welcome the idea. Wicked. Almost impious to feel that way. Some people thought so little of death that they actually took their own lives. Beatrice Taylor. Last night she had dreamt of Beatrice, dreamt that she was outside, pressing her face against the window and moaning, asking to be let in. But Emily Brent hadn't wanted to let her in, because if she did, something terrible would happen. Emily came to herself with a start. That girl was looking at her very strangely. She said in a brisk voice,
Everything's ready, isn't it? We'll take the breakfast in.
Breakfast was a curious meal. Everyone was very polite. May I get you more coffee, Miss Brent? Miss Claythorne, a slice of ham. Another piece of bacon. 6 people, all outwardly self-possessed and normal. And within, thoughts that ran round in a circle like squirrels in a cage. What next? What next? Who? Which? Would it work, I wonder? It's worth trying. If there's time. My God, if there's time.
Religious mania, that's the ticket. Looking at her, though, you can hardly believe it. Suppose I'm wrong.
It's crazy. Everything's crazy. I'm going crazy. Wool disappearing. Red silk curtains. It doesn't make sense. I can't get the hang of it.
Damned fool. He believed every word I said to him. It was easy. Must be careful, though. Very careful.
6 of those little china figures. Only 6. How many will there be by tonight?
Who'll have the last egg?
Marmalade?
Thanks. Can I get you some ham?
6 people behaving normally at breakfast. Chapter 12. The meal was over. Mr. Justice Wargrave cleared his throat. He said in a small, authoritative voice,
It would be advisable, I think, if we met to discuss the situation. Shall we say in half an hour's time in the drawing room?
Everyone made a sound suggestive of agreement. Vera began to pile plates together. She said,
I'll clear away and wash up.
Philip Lombard said, We'll bring the stuff out to the pantry for you.
Thanks.
Emily Brent, rising to her feet, sat down again. She said,
Oh dear.
The judge said,
Anything the matter, Miss Brent?
Emily said apologetically,
I'm sorry. I'd like to help Miss Claythorne, but I don't know how it is. I feel just a little giddy.
Giddy, eh? Dr. Armstrong?
Dr. Armstrong came towards her. Quite natural. Delayed shock. I can give you something to...
No!
The word burst from her lips like an exploding shell. It took everyone aback. Dr. Armstrong flushed a deep red. There was no mistaking the fear and suspicion in her face. He said stiffly, Just as you please, Miss Brent. She said,
I don't wish to take anything at all. I will just sit here quietly till the giddiness passes off.
They finished clearing away the breakfast things. Blore said, I'm a domestic sort of man. I'll give you a hand, Miss Claythorne.
Vera said,
Thank you. Emily Brent was left alone, sitting in the dining room. For a while, she heard a faint murmur of voices from the pantry. The giddiness was passing. She felt drowsy now, as though she could easily go to sleep. There was a buzzing in her ears, or was it a real buzzing in the room? She thought, It's like a bee, a bumblebee. Presently, she saw the bee. It was crawling up the window pane. Vera Claythorne had talked about bees this morning. Bees and honey. She liked honey. Honey in the comb. Strain it yourself through a muslin bag. Drip, drip, drip. There was somebody in the room. Somebody all wet and dripping. Beatrice Taylor came from the river. She had only to turn her head and she would see her. But she couldn't turn her head. If she were to call out. But she couldn't call out. There was no one else in the house. She was all alone. She heard footsteps. Soft, dragging footsteps coming up behind her. The stumbling footsteps of a drowned girl. There was a wet, dank smell in her nostrils. On the window pane, the bee was buzzing, buzzing, and then she felt the prick, the bee sting on the side of her neck. In the drawing room, they were waiting for Emily Brent. Vera Claythorne said,
Shall I go and fetch her?
Blore said quickly,
Just a minute.
Vera sat down again. Everyone looked inquiringly at Blore. He said,
Look here, everybody. My opinion's this. We needn't look farther for the author of these deaths in the dining room at this minute. I take my oath that woman's the one we're after.
Armstrong said, And the motive?
Religious mania. Why you say, Doctor?
Armstrong said,
It's
perfectly possible. I've nothing to say against it, but of course, we have no proof.
Vera said, "She was very odd in the kitchen when we were getting breakfast. Her eyes."
She shivered. Lombard said, "You can't judge her by that. We're all a bit off our heads by now." Blore said, "Oh, there's another thing. She's the only one who wouldn't give an explanation after that gramophone record. Why? Well, 'cause she hasn't got any to give."
Vera stirred in her chair. She said, "Well, that's not quite true. She told me afterwards."
Wargrave said,
What did she tell you, Miss Claythorne?
Vera repeated the story of Beatrice Taylor. Mr. Justice Wargrave observed,
A perfectly straightforward story. I personally should have no difficulty in accepting it. Tell me, Miss Claythorne, did she appear to be troubled by a sense of guilt or feeling of remorse for her attitude in the matter?
"None whatever," said Vera. "She was completely unmoved."
Blore said,
Hearts as hard as flints, these righteous spinsters.
Envy, mostly. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
It is now 5 minutes to 11. I think we should summon Miss Brent to join our conclave.
Blore said,
Well, aren't you going to take any action?
The judge said,
I fail to see what action we can take. Our suspicions are at the moment only suspicions. I will, however, ask Dr. Armstrong to observe Miss Brent's demeanor very carefully. Let us now go into the dining room.
They found Emily Brent sitting in the chair in which they had left her. From behind, they saw nothing amiss, except that she did not seem to hear their entrance into the room. And then they saw her face, suffused with blood, with blue lips and starting eyes. Blore said,
My God, she's dead.
The small, quiet voice of Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
One more of us acquitted. Too late.
Armstrong was bent over the dead woman. He sniffed the lips, shook his head, peered into the eyelids. Lombard said impatiently, How did she die, Doctor? She was all right when we left her here. Armstrong's attention was riveted on a mark on the right side of the neck. He said, That's the mark of a hypodermic needle. There was a buzzing sound from the window. Vera cried,
"Look! A bee! A bumblebee! Remember what I said this morning?"
Armstrong said grimly, It wasn't that bee that stung her. A human hand held the syringe. The judge asked,
What poison was injected?
Armstrong answered, At a guess, one of the cyanides. Probably potassium cyanide, same as Anthony Marston. She must have died almost immediately by asphyxiation.
Vera cried, "But that bee! It can't be coincidence!"
Lombard said grimly, Oh no, it isn't coincidence. It's our murderer's touch of local color. He's a playful beast, likes to stick to his damnable nursery jingle as closely as possible. For the first time his voice was uneven, almost shrill. It was as though even his nerves, seasoned by a long career of hazards and dangerous undertakings, had given out at last. He said violently, It's mad! Absolutely mad! We're all mad! The judge said calmly,
We have still, I hope, our reasoning powers. Did anyone bring a hypodermic syringe to this house?
Dr. Armstrong, straightening himself, said in a voice that was not too well assured, Yes, I did. 4 pairs of eyes fastened on him. He braced himself against the deep, hostile expressions of those eyes. He said, Always travel with one. Most doctors do. Mr. Justice Wargrave said calmly,
Quite so. Will you tell us, Doctor, where that syringe is now?
in the suitcase in my room. Wargrave said,
We might perhaps verify that fact.
The 5 of them went upstairs, a silent procession. The contents of the suitcase were turned out onto the floor. The hypodermic syringe was not there. Armstrong said violently, "Somebody must have taken it!" There was silence in the room. Armstrong stood with his back to the window. 4 pairs of eyes were on him, black with suspicion and accusation. He looked from Wargrave to Vera and repeated helplessly, weakly, I tell you, someone must have taken it! Bloor was looking at Lombard, who returned his gaze. The judge said,
There are 5 of us here in this room. 1 of us is a murderer. The position is fraught with grave danger. Everything must be done in order to safeguard the 4 of us who are innocent. I will now ask you, Dr. Armstrong, what drugs you have in your possession.
Armstrong replied, I have a small medicine case here. You can examine it. You'll find some sleeping stuff. Triono and sulfono tablets. A packet of bromide. Bicarbonate of soda. Aspirin. Nothing else. I have no cyanide in my possession. The judge said,
I have myself some sleeping tablets. Sulfono, I think they are. I presume they would be lethal if a sufficiently large dose were given. You, Mr. Lombard, have in your possession a revolver.
Philip Lombard said sharply, What if I have?
Only this. I propose that the doctor's supply of drugs, my own sulfonal tablets, your revolver, and anything else of the nature of drugs or firearms should be collected together and placed in a safe place. That after this is done, we should each of us submit to a search, both of our persons and of our effects.
Lombard said, I'm damned if I give up my revolver. Wargrave said sharply,
Mr. Lombard, you are a very strongly built and powerful young man, but ex-Inspector Bloor is also a man of powerful physique. I do not know what the outcome of a struggle between you would be, but I can tell you this. On Bloor's side, assisting him to the best of our ability will be myself, Dr. Armstrong, and Miss Claythorne. You will appreciate, therefore, that the odds against you, if you choose to resist, will be somewhat heavy.
Lombard threw his head back. His teeth showed in what was almost a snarl. Oh, very well then, since you've got it all taped out. Mr. Justice Wargrave nodded his head.
You are a sensible young man. Where is this revolver of yours?
In the drawer of the table by my bed.
Good.
I'll fetch it.
I think it'd be desirable if we went with you.
Philip said with a smile that was still nearer a snarl. Suspicious devil, aren't you? They went along the corridor to Lombard's room. Philip strode across to the bed table and jerked open the drawer. Then he recoiled with an oath. The drawer of the bed table was empty. Satisfied? Asked Lombard. He had stripped to the skin, and he and his room had been meticulously searched by the other 3 men. Vera Claythorne was outside in the corridor. The search proceeded methodically. In turn, Armstrong, the judge, and Bloor submitted to the same test. The 4 men emerged from Bloor's room and approached Vera. It was the judge who spoke.
I hope you will understand, Miss Claythorne, that we can make no exceptions. That revolver must be found. You have, I presume, a bathing dress with you?
Vera nodded.
Then I will ask you to go to your room and put it on, and then come out to us here.
Vera went into her room and shut the door. She reappeared in under a minute, dressed in a tight-fitting, silk-rucked bathing dress. Wargrave nodded approval.
Thank you, Miss Claythorne. Now, if you will remain here, we will search your room.
Vera waited patiently in the corridor until they emerged. Then she went in, dressed, and came out to where they were waiting. The judge said,
We are now assured of one thing. There are no lethal weapons or drugs in the possession of any of us five. That is one point to the good. We will now place the drugs in a safe place. There is, I think, a silver chest, is there not, in the pantry?
Blore said, Well, that's all very well and good, but who's to have the key? You, I suppose. Mr. Justice Wargrave made no reply. He went down to the pantry, and the others followed him. There was a small case there, designed for the purpose of holding silver and plate. By the judge's directions, the various drugs were placed in this, and it was locked. Then, still on Wargrave's instructions, the chest was lifted into the plate cupboard, and this in turn was locked. The judge then gave the key of the chest to Philip Lombard, and the key of the cupboard to Blore. He said,
You two are the strongest physically. It should be difficult for either of you to get the key from the other. It would be impossible for any of us three to do so. To break open the cupboard or the plate chest would be a noisy and cumbrous proceeding, and one which could hardly be carried out without attention being attracted to what was going on.
He paused, then went on.
We are still faced by one very grave problem. What has become of Mr. Lombard's revolver?
Blore said, Seems to me, its owner is the most likely person to know that. A white dint showed in Philip Lombard's nostrils. He said, You damn pig-headed fool. I tell you, it's been stolen from me. Wargrave asked,
When did you see it last?
Last night. It was in the drawer when I went to bed, ready in case anything happened. The judge nodded. He said,
It must have been taken this morning during the confusion of searching for Rogers or after his dead body was discovered.
Vera said, It must be hidden somewhere about the house. We must look for it. Mr. Justice Wargrave's finger was stroking his chin. He said,
I doubt if our search will result in anything. Our murderer has had plenty of time to devise a hiding place. I do not fancy we shall find that revolver easily.
Blore said forcefully, I don't know where the revolver is, but I'll bet I know where something else is. That hypodermic syringe. Follow me. He opened the front door and led the way round the house. A little distance away from the dining room window, he found the syringe. Beside it was a smashed china figure, a sixth broken soldier boy. Blore said in a satisfied voice, The only place it could be. After he killed her, he opened the window and threw out the syringe and picked up the china figure from the table and followed on with that. There were no prints on the syringe. It had been carefully wiped. Vera said in a determined voice, Now let us look for the revolver. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
By all means, but in doing so, let us be careful to keep together. Remember, if we separate, the murderer gets his chance.
They searched the house carefully from attic to cellar, but without result. The revolver was still missing. And that takes us to the end of chapter 12. And that, my friends, takes us to the end of tonight's stream, I believe. Let me see how many chapters we have left just to make sure. yeah, so there's. Yep. We just finished chapter 12. There's 18 chapters. So, I'm thinking perhaps there are 6 chapters left. And I'm thinking whether or not to do a sort of mega section or a session next time and just do it all, or to do two readings of 3 chapters to break it up. Because next week I could either do one long session or two medium ones. What do you guys think? Two readings. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so then that means trying to figure it out mentally, map out my schedule. Okay. Then that means I'll go ahead and telegraph it for you guys right now. Next Wednesday and next Saturday, I will do a reading stream. So there'll be 2 reading streams next week so we can finish this up because I have to return this to the library. And I think I have to do that on Tuesday, the following Tuesday after next week. So, okay. I will, yeah, because Monday night is going to be my fighting game stream. Wednesday is my usual reading. Friday is my usual other gaming. Yeah, okay. Wednesday and Saturday next week, we'll finish up this story. This is going to be quite a wild ride. Part of me really wants to do that long one because it's getting really exciting, but and you know what? Part of me is kind of like anyway. Thank you all so much for coming here, being part of this reading stream, and for hanging out and listening along. I hope that you guys enjoyed the voice acting. I hope that you guys enjoyed the story. And I hope that it's as much fun for you guys as it is for me, because I'm really loving this book. Really enjoying the mystery, really enjoying the ramp up. This really feels like reading this makes me understand where a lot of modern mystery, a lot of modern where a lot of like modern mystery stories gets their inspiration from, like seeing the history in action, like with Sherlock Holmes stories. With this, it's exciting. It's so cool. I'm really digging it. I'm so in love with this. Okay, I'm rambling. But yeah, so this coming Friday in 2 days, I will be playing more Mirror's Edge. I have been given some resources to perhaps help prevent the game from breaking again like it did last time. Your voice acting is always amazing. Aw, you're too nice. You're contractually obligated to be nice to me, so I don't know how much I believe that. No, I'm just kidding. But, yeah, okay. So, I'm gonna get going because... Oh, I don't want to. But I have to. But I don't want to. Alright. I'm just doing my job. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm telling you. It's your job to be nice and to compliment my voice acting, because you're literally like... Anyway. Okay. thank you all so much for being here. I sincerely enjoy the reading streams, and I'm very glad that everyone who answered the poll that I put up about the reading streams answered overwhelmingly positive. Thank you guys so much for enjoying the reading streams. Thank you so much for having fun listening and being part of it and just letting me loose, I guess, with audio booking these stories for you and voice acting and getting to have fun with it and thank you all. Oh, yeah, just because I want to keep plugging it as well. Remember, if I get to 50 subscribers by the end of the month, I will plan a karaoke event. I have a very special concept in mind that I want to do, so here's hoping. But, honestly, if not, that's okay. We can always, it. No, I want to believe we can do it. We can hit that goal. It's gonna be great. Anyway. Okay. Sign off for real, Ray. Sign off. Alright. Thank you guys so much. You are an awesome audience. I love my Rainiacs and my Langsters. Make sure to eat well, stay hydrated, get lots of good rest, be kind to yourselves, and be excellent to each other. And, as always, make sure to unshrimp yourselves. Take care, everyone. Have a radiant rest of your night, and I will see you on Friday. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.